Welcome to the first ever GraphQL conference. I see a lot of friends in the audience, I see a lot of new faces, and I'm really grateful that so many of us working together on GraphQL are all able to get together in one place. The atmosphere here has really been electric this morning. I've just been getting so pumped, talking to people, hearing about how you're using GraphQL, and just seeing the excitement that everyone seems to have. My only regret about this conference is that we didn't run 2 tracks because we got so many amazing talk submissions. We easily could have filled 2 tracks with great speakers, great material, so that's definitely something we'll fix next year. So apologies to the people that submitted awesome talk proposals that we just couldn't jam in. In fact, the whole conference ended up like almost twice as big as we planned. We targeted 200 people. We thought that would be an awesome success for the first GraphQL conference. We ended up cutting it a bit north of 350 when we just got to the point where the logistics became overwhelming. So that's what the last couple months have been like for us. So for the keynote, I just want to talk about the rise of GraphQL. So, rise of GraphQL. Is GraphQL really rising? Well, spoiler, yes. The first piece of evidence is this conference. Not only is it sold out and then some, take a look at some of the people that I was able to fit on this slide before I ran out of space. This is a who's who of the great tech companies. And I apologize if I left you off on the slide. There's just too many great companies. But digging a little deeper, another question we could ask is, who's hiring for GraphQL? And earlier this year, we took a look at that. And we just pulled all the GraphQL jobs posts we could find on the various job sites around the internet. And we found dozens and dozens of companies, somewhat to our surprise, even a couple months ago, that were already posting positions for GraphQL, indicating that they'd already gone through the cycle of trying GraphQL, liking it, and getting to the point where they are, have validated enough that they're now hiring against it. So this is a small but representative sample. And the main thing I want to illustrate here is that GraphQL spans company sizes. It spans industries. You see it being adopted at small startups who are just getting started, but also maybe even more strongly, you see it being adopted at large companies with very sophisticated IT departments because GraphQL can deliver so much value in that environment that it's worth investigating this new technology. Okay, so how about the ecosystem? How about the open source ecosystem around GraphQL? Well, how about this? If you search for GraphQL on GitHub, you find over 2,000 repositories. And this isn't repositories that are using GraphQL. This is repositories that are called GraphQL. These are different projects and connectors and add-ons and modules for GraphQL. And speaking of GitHub, most people here probably know that just last month, GraphQL itself made the news when they announced that they're moving their public API over to GraphQL or adding a public GraphQL API next to their REST API, which is huge. It's a big milestone for GraphQL. And I can't share the details, but I know of at least 2 other big names that are planning to launch major public GraphQL APIs in the next year. So it's a first data point, not a last data point. This is a screenshot from the recent Angular Connect conference, the big conference in the Angular ecosystem. And this is a member of the Angular core team talking about how to do data fetching in Angular and Angular's point of view on data fetching. And the first thing on the slide is GraphQL. They even invited Apollo's own Uri Goldstein, who's speaking later today, on stage during the keynote to talk about it. So what you learn from that is that they consider data fetching to be important, and they see GraphQL as a viable way to do that they're comfortable putting in front of the Angular community in a pretty high-profile talk. And just one more proof point here. We did a survey of some of the larger companies, some of the enterprises that are at the conference here today in advance of the conference to make sure we're meeting your needs. One of the things we asked was, how important will GraphQL be to your organization in 2017? And almost on a scale of 0 to 100, almost half of the respondents said that it would be 100 out of 100, mission critical in 2017. So that's the sentiment that we're seeing, at least among conference attendees, which is obviously a biased sample. I'd like to say a visionary sample of enterprise sentiment. So let's add all that up. We've got growing use by leading companies. We've got a large open source ecosystem. We've got adoption by major public APIs. We've got the endorsements from the view layers, especially on the JavaScript side, like Angular and React. And we're also starting to see this mission-critical enterprise sentiment. So what I get from this is that we shouldn't be thinking about GraphQL as a piece of software. We should be thinking about GraphQL as the beginning of a big movement in the industry, like containerization or big data. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, let me tell you about something I believe. I believe it's possible to make developer tools much better than they are today. Not just a little bit better, but much better, so much better that they unlock new opportunities for people all over the world. And some years ago, I and a couple friends started a company called Meteor Development Group around these beliefs. That's the company that's hosting us today. And we started out by building Meteor.js, the full-stack JavaScript framework. That's been an amazing experience. It's grown to become a top 20 project on GitHub, and that's like really fun professionally. But the thing that was really exciting to me about it is that it proved to me that it's possible to build really powerful dev tools that can advance the state of the art, but more importantly than that, they can make a big difference in real people's lives when we just see the impact that good developers can have on people. So we've now been in the open source business for over 5 years, and for all the reasons I just presented to you and a dozen more, we think that GraphQL is the next big thing, and we think that it's the biggest way that we can help advance app development. So building great GraphQL tools and libraries has become our main focus, and I don't think we're the only ones, or we'll be the only ones in the future. So, why is GraphQL so exciting? Like, where did this come from? How did this happen? GraphQL, one of the challenges sometimes in talking about GraphQL is that there's this laundry list of benefits. And, sometimes people say, well, they're kind of synergistic, you get a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it all adds up to a great solution. But I think there's a way to distill it down, even though it's not going to perfectly capture the whole GraphQL value proposition. And that's that I think GraphQL, at its core, is really the first good solution to what you might call the data loading problem. So here's the data loading problem. You've got a ton of services in the cloud. We've had this amazing explosion of cloud computing. It's becoming easier and easier to stand up a service in the cloud, so many tools to do this, and also so many services that are already available to us. It's getting so easy to scale these services, and they're just like multiplying like bunny rabbits. And then we've got all these great apps, and the apps are running on our phones in our pockets, they're running on our watches, they're running on our thermostats, they're running in the dashboard of our cars, they're even running in our web browser, now that the web browser has actually grown up from being a hypertext viewer, like this vision of the world's library, the universal library, right, into the universal app platform. So we've got all these apps on the edge of the network that give us the possibility of like reaching us at every point in our life where we might want to have access to all these services. But all that's useless if those parts can't talk to each other. If those clients can't talk to the cloud services, it's you're just playing games on your phone. Like it's a whole different value proposition. So in the past, this wasn't a big problem because the apps were pretty simple. In particular, we mostly used to use this architecture, if you go back 5 or 10 years, where you just had this app. The app was a process on your server. We didn't even think about installable apps on your devices. The app was a process on the server, and it talked to a database, and then it pushed HTML down to the client. So there was no data loading problem because it's just a process talking to a database. But now what's happened is things have gotten much more complicated. So any given screen in your app might have 100 pieces of data on it, or more, and all those pieces of data might be coming from a different place. And you need to pull all that data in a single round trip, or you're going to have bad performance. You need to fetch only the data you actually need. You can't overfetch data, because that will also kill performance, especially on wireless mobile networks. And you don't just have one app, you probably have a couple apps, and maybe you've got the iOS and the Android version, or maybe you've got the version for your users and the version for your admins, or maybe you're a market and you've got the two sides of the marketplace. However many apps you have right now, you're probably going to have more apps if we look forward a year or two. And likewise, however many backend services you have, you're probably going to have more of them if we look forward a couple years. And what's more, your app really isn't based on screens anymore. It's probably based on reusable UI components, or that's probably where you're trying to go, that you're constantly recombining in different ways so you can rapidly roll out new features. So now you've got this situation where you have this data fetching problem where you have to fetch a whole bunch of data from a lot of different places. It needs to be exactly the right data. It needs to be highly performant. And you need to do it even as the app landscape is changing, the service landscape is changing, and the features in your app is also changing. So enter GraphQL. So GraphQL is the first true comprehensive solution to that data loading problem. And it's proven at scale, and it has support from across the industry. And that's what's driven, I think, this whole explosion of interest. There's been a lot of attempts to solve this problem in the past, but GraphQL is the one that's gotten traction, and it's kind of interesting to think about that. There's been many tools, many products, many approaches to that are all basically feeling around this, how's my backend going to talk to my front end? And I think that the reason why GraphQL got here is a combination of three factors: openness, flexibility, and power. And it just kind of hits the sweet spot between those three considerations. So it's open. GraphQL is open because it's not a piece of software. It's a specification. So right away, that means that it's possible for an ecosystem to grow up around GraphQL and for it to serve lots of different needs. And I think that's the first thing that GraphQL got really right, that a lot of the previous attempts at solving this, it's natural. You have a problem, you want to build a tool for it. But I think the first thing that's really correct about GraphQL is, for a bunch of reasons, it's a specification first. The second thing is that it's flexible, because it's not coupled to any particular language, it's not coupled to any particular database, it's not coupled to any particular hosting environment. And what that means is, no matter what your environment is, you can easily add GraphQL to that environment, at least if you've got the right tooling with you. And finally, it's powerful. I mean, we can say powerful in the lowercase sense, just in the sense that it lets me do more things than other tools, it's got more features. But I think there's also a powerful in a capital sense. And I think the power from GraphQL really comes from the fact that it's declarative. Or to put it a different way, instead of writing code, you write queries. And this was the big insight in the 70s that brought us relational databases, right? Before SQL, you still had databases. Where you got a database was you hired a database PhD, and they wrote you a database. Your query planner was a human being. And then there was this insight, well, wait a second, if we make databases, if we put a query engine in front of our database, so I can just type a query, and that query declaratively specifies what I want, then the database engine can get better and better at fulfilling that query. Thankfully, I don't think this problem is as hard, as complicated, or as in need of amazing query engines as a database, thankfully. But I think the insight is basically the same, which is when you go to a declarative way of approaching problems, sometimes it lets you move complexity out of your code base and into your tooling. And the consequence, in GraphQL's case, of moving that complexity out of your code base and into your tooling means that you can achieve really high levels of performance, really high levels of security, really high levels of correctness. And you can do that with confidence across your whole code base, because you know it's being done the same way each time, because it's in the tooling, not in the code. And you can do it with minimum effort, because the tooling's doing the work, not you. So I think those are the three things: openness, flexibility, and power. And because GraphQL is just at the right Venn diagram of these things, in less than a year, it's managed to emerge as the de facto right pattern for data loading, as far as I can tell, certainly. But there's a little bit more here, which is, you could hear all that and think about GraphQL as a library or piece of software, but really, I think once you've been using GraphQL for a little while, you discover there's something more to it, which is GraphQL gives you the opportunity to change the process you have for writing software. And I've heard some people start to call this GraphQL-first, or a GraphQL-first approach. And I think you can put this on a pretty big heading. There's a lot of positive changes it introduces. Let me give you an example. So GitHub's a good example. Most of you heard about GitHub's awesome public GraphQL API, but GitHub doesn't just use GraphQL for their public API. Instead, they have a new orientation, and I think there'll be more about this later, so if I've gotten it wrong, I think there's a talk where it can be corrected. When they build a new feature, they build the GraphQL API first, and then their front-end developers build the UI for that feature on top of the GraphQL API. And that has a lot of benefits, because it knows you have a really consistent and clean API for the feature. It also means, in GitHub's case, that they can take that feature and bring it to all their partners, everyone building on top of the GitHub API, at the same time as it's available internally. And they can have feature parity between that external API and that internal API, which is a pretty cool use case if you're GitHub. But this approach, so this is my very high-level diagram of GraphQL first. And The main idea here is you put a GraphQL schema at the center of your feature, at the center of the feature you're developing. And maybe you work from the schema out. And it's going to have different realizations for different teams if you go this way. And like I said, this is totally separate from the tooling. Like, you could totally disagree with everything I'm saying and still have a great time with GraphQL, but I just wanted to see this idea. We've been building our products GraphQL-first now. We've talked to a lot of people that have as well. Let me tell you about some of the benefits we're seeing. One thing that's really cool is that the client developers and the service developers can work independently. So you're building a new feature, you can write down what the schema is going to be, and then the client teams can work with a mock schema. There's even some cool tooling out there that will take your GraphQL schema and automatically generate mocks for it. There you go. They can go build the front end. Meanwhile, the service team can go build the services and test against that GraphQL API, and then you can meet in the middle with much higher confidence than you would have had in the past that it's going to work when you put the pieces together. It also means you can easily add new clients. So if today you've got a Swift client on the front end and you've got some services on the back end, and later you want to add an Android client or you want to add a website that's based on JavaScript, you can easily add these new clients. You can even decide that, hey, I'm ready to move from Swift to React Native, for example. I'm ready to try that out. You can make all those changes, and because everything's sitting on top of that schema, you don't even have to talk to the service team in the perfect world. Or if you do, there's a lot less work that needs to be done because you abstracted like your front end from your back end. And likewise on the back end, you've got a ton of flexibility. You can use lots of different languages. You could start with a monolithic back end and you can refactor into microservices. So getting onto GraphQL is a great choice if you think that in the future you want to go that route from monolithic to microservices. And it's also a great fit from component-oriented design where you embed the data dependencies of every component in the component itself, because it lets you get away from this model where I had to write a REST query for each page in my application and feed the data into the components. Now, the components can just carry their queries with them, and the GraphQL tooling solves the problem of fetching what you need. And the best news about all this is it's really easy to get started with GraphQL-first design. And across the ecosystem, what we've seen is what we've seen more than anything else is people adding it to production apps that are already at scale. And what they do is they go GraphQL-first on just one feature. It's like, my next feature, I'm going to try this GraphQL-based approach. Maybe you call it GraphQL-first, maybe you just call it using GraphQL. I'll get that into production, I'll see how it goes, and then they do another feature, and then maybe they do another feature at whatever pace they want. And often what they find is the benefits of GraphQL are compelling enough that it turns into a conversation about moving more of the new feature development over to GraphQL. But the cool thing is you can go at your own pace, you can taste it, you can see, is this good, is it for us? Let's talk about the ecosystem that's developing around this. Who's working on GraphQL and GraphQL-first? A ton of stuff. Look at this. This is the awesome GraphQL Awesome project, if you want to go check out all these links. There's been a ton of open source projects and open source work already. It's been an incredibly fertile area, and I think it's only going to accelerate. So with that said, I really believe in GraphQL-first and making it doing our part to make it the new way people build apps, because I believe in the possibility of a better developer experience. So if I may be so bold, I want to just take a minute to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing at Meteor and Apollo. So we call our work collectively Apollo. That's kind of our brand for a collection of tools and libraries. And our idea here is that you can take these pieces, you can combine them with each other, you can combine with anything in the GraphQL ecosystem to build the ideal GraphQL setup for your particular use case. Or you can use them one-on-one individually. Just the idea is they are high-quality pieces of independent technology. And I think of the Apollo umbrella here as standing for three things. First of all, 100% spec-compliant GraphQL. It's just a great GraphQL implementation. So that means you're not locked into anything. We want to follow the standard. We want to help push the standard forward. But we think that the way forward for GraphQL should be based on really strong interop and really strong community discussions around the standards and really good tooling that is based on those ideas. Second, and really most importantly, it's built as a community collaboration. And what that means to me is we all work together to figure out what GraphQL needs next. But more than just talking about it, we actually work together to build it collaboratively. And I think that that's a great way to make sure that every feature we roll out is actually addressing the real production needs faced by real users. Because I think with an exciting technology like this that's new, so much of the stuff is information that's coming in from the field as people try building these apps. And closing that feedback loop, like what are you experiencing? What do you want next? That's the way we build great tools. And finally, the pieces are designed to stand alone, but we also want to make sure that for people that choose to use one or more of the pieces, we can certify that they work well together and interoperate. So the vision here is as more of these pieces grow, if you want, something where the pieces have been tested together by, a group of people, you have that option. But if you want to pull it apart and use the pieces independently, that's also something you can do. So I've got 3 big Apollo announcements today. First, I am very excited to announce that the JavaScript version of the Apollo client is leaving technical preview. So earlier this year, we talked with a lot of people around the ecosystem, basically everyone we could find who was using GraphQL. And one of the things that you told us is about what you want in a GraphQL client. So we heard you want a client that works with whatever technology you're already using, be that Redux or Angular or React or any other front end. It shouldn't require you to change your tooling in order to get on the GraphQL train. Second, you wanted it to be really easy to understand how it works, and you wanted it to be really easy to be able to contribute to the open source project. But at the same time, it's also a requirement that it not sacrifice any of the full power of GraphQL. So it's got to strike this balance between not being a black box, like understanding the parts that are inside, but also being able to do all the stuff that you can do with GraphQL and not feel like you've accepted a limitation or given up some big function of GraphQL. And I think what we've found is that is, in fact, eminently possible. In fact, it gets easier the more people are able to understand the model of what the client's actually doing. And third, you wanted excellent docs. So the result of those conversations has been the JavaScript version of Apollo client. And with over 100 contributors from many people in this room, including leading GraphQL companies like Credit Karma and Coursera, I think it's really living up to its motto of by the community, for the community. And what's more, Apollo client's already leading the way with advanced features like GraphQL subscriptions. We shipped subscription support, I think, just a couple weeks ago now, and there's already multiple implementations of subscriptions for different backends and databases. And what's really exciting to me about those is they're coming out of people's actual experiences, like what backend do you want for subscriptions? How am I going to integrate with Redis? How am I going to integrate with Postgres? Like, what do you need in your environment? And there's more to come after subscriptions. I think a lot of us can see all the power and excitement in some of the future GraphQL features that we're looking at, and we're going to keep on trying to bring those things to Apollo client and have it be based on the actual contributions, actual production needs of the people that are out there in production with Apollo client. So I just want to thank everyone in the audience who's been a part of this. It's been a huge collaboration. And it's really exciting that with GraphQL leaving technical preview a month ago, we're already now able to bring Apollo client that same production seal of approval. And it's been an incredible community collaboration, and we're going to make this the template for everything we do under the Apollo banner. So could we have a round of applause for everyone who contributed to Apollo client? Yeah. And I want to make it clear, we don't see this as the only GraphQL client. It is something that we built with a group of people, and we think it can help a lot of people move forward. But I think that the way to make GraphQL strong is to have multiple clients and a lot of different points of view, a lot of different languages, a lot of different ideas. That is the case of every vibrant open source ecosystem. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that this is like the only GraphQL client that we would ever endorse or recommend. I think there's a lot of fantastic stuff out there. The best one's probably yet to be written. Second, though, I'm equally excited to announce the first native mobile version of Apollo client. So this is Apollo client for Swift. And we heard loud and clear that there's a lot of people that want to use GraphQL in their native mobile applications, and that when you do that, you should have a GraphQL experience that feels right at home in the workflow of a developer that's working in both, working in iOS, working in Xcode. So I'm going to spend less time on this because it's at an earlier stage. But take a look at this, this early preview of Apollo client for Swift. And I think what this really shows is the power of GraphQL for mobile development. And from the screen cap, you can already see some of the reasons why. Like, what you're going to see here is when you delete, you've got your queries, you've got your schema and your code side by side, and when you delete a field from the schema, you see the compile error in your code, because we're able to generate from your schema, from your queries, a set of Swift types that are even specific to each query, and we're able to give you inline feedback about whether you're using GraphQL correctly, and whether all the types are checking out. We're able to do the auto-completion, we're able to inline the compiler errors. And we've been hearing from the folks at Facebook for a long time that the original motivation for GraphQL was all of the power that they could get for native mobile development. So I'm really excited to work together with everyone who wants to contribute. We already have some great contributors and great contributions from developers at companies you've all heard of to build this out into the best native mobile GraphQL experience it can be, and to bring it to Android and Objective-C. We've already had contributions that are the starting point for both of those languages, and we'd love to have your help too. And one more thing, I'm really excited to announce something we've been working hard on for a long time, which is Meteor Development Group's first ever commercial product for GraphQL. And the background here is, over and over again, talking to developers, we've heard two things. First of all, there's a real need for production-grade instrumentation to understand the performance of how your app is actually performing in practice. Because a lot of the tools that you probably used before with REST, you might see all of your GraphQL traffic showing up as like one endpoint called /GraphQL. When it should be the opposite. You should have so much better visibility because we've got so much great information, like with all this typing. The second thing is, it extends beyond performance. There's a huge opportunity to use GraphQL to get more insight into how your clients are actually using your API and how your clients are actually using your app data. So I am really excited to announce our attempt to deliver on the first little bit of each of those value propositions, which is called Apollo Optics. And here it is. Apollo Optics is designed to be what you need to go into production with confidence with GraphQL. And it's built from the ground up, not just to give you that confidence, but to help you get maximum value out of your GraphQL use. So what Optics does is it basically gives you two views. There's one view that's a view of, so you can see, I guess we can start here. There's a schema view that gives you insight into how your apps are, okay, I'm not going to try to sync to the video. There's a schema view. The schema view shows you, let's take a look at my schema. Let's take a look at which clients are using which fields and how much. And that's really useful if you're saying, I want to deprecate this field, but some client is still querying it. Which client is still querying it? What do I need to do if I want to deprecate this field? And for example. And the other view is a performance view. And the performance view gives you a field by field, resolver by resolver breakdown of exactly what each query is costing and how it's assembled and how that's distributed, and how that's changing over time. So you can see, hey, occasionally this query takes way too long. Oh yeah, it's because occasionally this server ends up blocking all of the GraphQL resolution when it takes too long to respond. Or you can say, I thought that would be fast, it's actually slow, and you can discover, hey, that's because I thought it was going to get parallelized, but it's actually running in serial. So it gives you that insight to understand what's really going on. And the reason I'm so excited about this is I think it'll help more people get into production with GraphQL faster, and I also think it'll help make the case of the value for GraphQL beyond just performance. So the nitty-gritty, it works with Relay, it works with Apollo Client, it works with bare GraphQL, it works with anything you want to throw at it. That's the Apollo philosophy, independently designed parts that, oh hey, that wasn't supposed to happen. They work great together. They work great alone, they also work great together. The one hitch is it does need a server-side agent to collect some of the data. Right now what we have is a JavaScript agent that works with, I think, just about every JavaScript server that anyone's using in production. But we also have a beta version of the Ruby agent, thanks to some awesome community contributions. Thank you very much. And that's great because we know that there are many people who want to use this in your GraphQL Rails app, which has already emerged as like a really common GraphQL use case. And we want everyone to use it, so we've given it a really attractive price point. We've thrown in a 2-week free trial, and we're giving demos upstairs if anyone wants to give it a test drive. So my biggest message from all of that is we're here to help. We want to see the world go GraphQL first, and we want to do whatever we can to help make that happen. So we're going to keep on trying to listen, trying to help organize around whatever the gaps are in the whole GraphQL first story. We're going to keep collaborating with all of you. And beyond software too, the training yesterday sold out on Flash. A lot of people had to be turned away, so we're going to look to see if we can help get some more trainings organized, because that's important to some people, to many people. And we're also announcing today a GraphQL support program. So for those of you that want a commercial vendor relationship with us, or they just want to pick our brains about what we've learned from talking to a lot of people in the ecosystem, we can provide that service to you. Let's take a quick look forward to 2017. Where's GraphQL going to go in 2017? I think 2017 is going to be the year that GraphQL goes from a technology to a movement. I think we're going to see hundreds of new GraphQL projects and libraries that are pretty useful. I mean, we already have hundreds, so maybe that number should be higher. Thousands of new jobs requiring GraphQL skills. There's going to be an opportunity for hundreds of consultancies, hundreds of training companies to offer their GraphQL skills and knowledge to the marketplace as we take literally millions of developers, if it gets as big as I think it might, and onboard them onto GraphQL. We're going to see a new generation of GraphQL-first product companies. So we've seen Reindex, Scaffold, GraphQL, and now Apollo Optics. There's going to be a lot more, I think. And the other big thing is I think we're going to see some more big public APIs on GraphQL, and that's going to be rocket fuel because, think about it, it could be the most powerful vector for developer adoption that's ever happened because if you're a developer, you spend most of your day as a developer looking at APIs. And if every API you look at is talking about, hey, here, you can try it with GraphQL, and you try it with GraphQL, which is really easy if it's a public API, and you like it, that's going to expose this idea and this way of development to so many people so quickly. So I think it's going to be a really exciting year. If you've been working on GraphQL for a while now, or if this is your first time checking it out, either way, I hope you'll take a look around the room and feel pride about what we've built and what we can build together. This is an awesome day. We have a lot of the top people in the GraphQL community in one room. It's an awesome opportunity to learn from each other, to share your experiences. If you're farther along, maybe pay it forward and help someone who's just getting started. You have a chance to make connections here that are going to lead to the next great open source project or even the next GraphQL company, or they're going to help you make the case for GraphQL in an organization, help you ship features faster. There's so many ways to get involved, and I just think there's a huge opportunity in front of us. So most of all, though, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for your contributions. GraphQL going from a specification to everything that we saw in those first couple slides is largely due to the efforts of people in this room and a few people that couldn't be here. So let's be excited about that, and let's take a deep breath, let's enjoy today, and let's get excited for the next year. So thank you all.